there will be some of that. First, the blue sheets are going around. Please sign them so that we get the right number of people for the room next time. One bit of information I would like to introduce you all to Alvaro. He's our new AD, so Adrian will be retiring after this meeting. You're still on for this meeting, I suppose. Yes. We have the agenda, we have the overview of all the drafts. We're going to go over all the drafts, and then we have a discussion about DLAP, and then HTTP. The open discussion this time, I would like to, I guess this is my batch, the agenda. I would like to talk about rechartering the working group as we're wrapping up many of our milestones that we have.
Yeah, I just want to add to that we've talked about rechartering for 2 or 3 IETFs now, and trying to get the discussion rolling, and it's gone from something that, gee, it would be nice to do and everybody needs to think about it, to this needs to be top of the list now. We are starting to wrap up the work that was done. We need to decide if the group wants to go in new directions and do new things, that work that we can identify and actually accomplish, or if it's time to close the group. But that discussion needs to happen on list, and it needs to start now. So.
Well, start after the presentation. We'll do that. Then we'll do.
That's what by now. I mean.
I mentioned so that everyone has time to think about that a little bit. Okay. So.
All right. First of all, any issues with the agenda? Everybody's happy with the agenda. We will assume that silence is equal to acceptance. So.
We have a Jabber scribe. Can we have somebody to take minutes? I know somebody who can take minutes well. Brian? All right. Thank you.
I thought somebody volunteered on the list when asked. Okay. Yeah.
Do you mind doing both? I mean, actually, both is good, and Brian knows a lot of secrets. So, also, when you go to the mic, just speak your name first, so everyone knows. We have the note well, so if there's anything you have regarding IPR, you need to state that before. As I just mentioned, please state your name when you talk into the mic whenever you say anything for our remote participants, because they are out there and they're on the list. We have a Jabber scribe. So, NHTTP optimization, that was proposed standard. It's been finished. It wasn't a huge document, but it did improve some things with NHTTP. These are our active documents. We're going to go over AODB and DLAP in more depth. The ID-based signatures for many routing protocols is kind of in a IESG purgatory. Yes, I didn't want to use hell, but it's being worked on actively by Chris Dearlove, and he's working very hard on making that get through. The directional based metric, that's headings document, based to give metrics for OLSR based upon his experiences with OLSR implementations and deployment. I've actually implemented that. The working group hasn't talked a lot about it recently, but I think it's a good draft and we should look to move that forward relatively soon. Next. OLSRV 2 management snapshots been submitted for publication. Multipath, the authors have been asking for a last call on that. The co-chairs have been holding off on issuing a last call. I just gave comments yesterday regarding what I think needs to be improved on that document. I would like everyone to take a solid look at that document. It's not very long, but it's proposed experimental, and I don't think it's too far off from a last call, and I think with some participation we can make that happen relatively soon. Most of my issues were with readability of the document. I think having an English speaker, a native English speaker, look over it would help clear it up a whole lot and would get it ready for last call in short order. Multi-topology proposed for publication. We just adopted OLSRV 2 sec threats. Again, that's kind of an OLSR OLSR maintenance document. We have these companion documents for SMF and for NHTP, so this is the OLSR version of it to show what are the threats for OLSR. It's informational. Report mid. That's been sitting around for a while. I talked to Bob Cole the other day, and there is effort to get that finished. And we just need to talk to the appropriate people with MIB doctors if they're still around and make that happen as soon as possible. Adrian, I don't know if you've talked with Bob about that.
No, I haven't talked.
If you have something to say, yeah, that'd be good.
So not surprisingly, writing MIBs in here has been, my name's Bob Cole, I'm with the U.S. Army, has been challenging. And the biggest problem we have is that the MIBs will sit around in the working group forever with no comments. We go to last call, they pass. We hit the MIB doctors and it gets blasted with 100 comments. Report MIBs changed drastically in the latest revision. It uses something called DISMAN. There's not a lot of DISMAN expertise around. I'd prefer to have a DISMAN MIB doctor person review the document before it goes to last call. And I sent out a plea to Randy Prasong, who was the old DISMAN chair. Yesterday, I haven't heard back from him. I sent out a plea to Benoit to see if he would find somebody, talk to Jurgen and some other people. So if you could help, if you think that's a reasonable approach and you could help, I'd really appreciate it.
Yeah, it's Adrian. Yeah, getting MIB doctor reviews early is a good idea. So when you think that you're largely stable, approaching people this week to ask for reviews. I believe there's some conference going on to do with the internet somewhere, and people are a bit busy. But we can chase. It's likely to be that you need to chase through Alvaro rather than through me, but actually, after this week I might be a resource to review it anyway. And yeah, there's actually a mailing list for contacting the MIB doctors that Alvaro can use, so yeah.
So yeah, I put a lot of work into getting to this draft. I think it's pretty stable as far as the structure of the draft. The only thing that might change are some description clauses that need more material in them, but the structure of the MIB's not going to change, I don't believe. So yeah, I would appreciate any help in reviews. And Adrian, if you in the past you've given me really good reviews on MIB, so if you do have time, that'd be great. So thanks.
And then we have definition of managed objects for neighborhood discovery protocol and the TLV naming, the reorganization of the naming of the packet DBs registries have been submitted for IESG publication. And we have we passed last call without any comments really on SMF sec threats. although we did receive some after last fall that may be incorporated.
Are you finished with the?
Yes, I'm finished with
okay,
the list.
yes. So just wanted to wait for that to come back to the directional airtime metric draft. So just wanted to point out there's a second implementation out there in Riot, and also an HTTP implementation in Riot. Maybe you know about it. I don't know. You'll be pleased to know about it. And so yeah, I just wanted to know, like, you know, probably time soon to freeze the spec to get some more, you know, experimental results. And so I just wanted, like, to know if you have already in mind, you know, some kind of path towards this more precisely than what you just stated, or?
I would like to have it started before the next IETF. I would like, before we get to last fall, since we have, you mentioned 2 implementations, and I have actually implemented this as well.
Yep.
We have 3 implementations. I would like to do a mini interop just to see if we missed anything. That would be really helpful.
Okay.
So yes, please see me about that. I guess I went over all of these in the list, so.
All right, DLEP. There was a discussion in the Honolulu IETF about the lack of progress in DLEP. It's been uneven as we move forward. The agreement coming out of Honolulu was that we would rev the DLEP document one more time and then see where we were vis-a-vis last call, with that being the goal. DLEP 08, like this says, was submitted on February 27th. The main technical changes that were in the DLEP document were a description of the handling of experimental TLVs, both for data items and for signals, a way to register and communicate between peers how you're going to utilize that experimental space. And then secondly, the definition of a registry for future extensions, of which one entry is currently defined, that being the credit windowing. The balance of the changes were largely editorial in nature, trying to change words. There was, over a period of time, there was some fairly obtuse expressions of mandatory, optional, mandatory data items. They're mandatory except when they're optional, but they might be mandatory even though they are, you know. We attempted to clean that up and make it understandable. And we've also, there was an opinion expressed that the way the 07 draft was organized, it defined the data items first and then the signals. The feedback we got was that that's kind of like giving us the what before the how before the what. So all that text has just been flipped around. So that's really it. Next slide. And in an attempt to make sure that my slide was proven wrong, there were no issues received as of March 20th when I did this, but on the 21st or the 22nd, lo and behold, we got feedback. We did get a review from Bonan at MIT. It had some grammatical errors that had been pointed out in it, and then there was a discussion about the status TLV, that it would be a nice to have. Right now the status TLV is just a numeric code. So I think the consensus to move forward is to make that a numeric code, and then right behind it optionally a text string that is non-null, terminated, UTF-8 formatted, that gives the implementation reporting an error an opportunity to describe what the error is for logging, for debugging, those kinds of things. And with the dearth of other responses out on the list, again, we're going to assume that silence is agreement on this. Therefore, what we propose going forward is that once we get home, we'll rev the DLEP document to include those changes for the status TLB. We'll fix the grammatical errors that are in the document, and at that point, we feel like the doc is ready for last call. And we would also like to ask the consensus of the people in the room and on the web, do you agree with that position? Are we indeed, with those very minor changes, ready for last call? I'd like to see a hum or some indication of whether or not there's consensus in the room. So how many people have read the doc? I got 2, yes, I've read it, and 1, maybe I did. Huh? Okay. Give me a hum if you think this is essentially ready for last call. Okay. Give me a hum if you think it is absolutely not ready for last call. I'm going to call that consensus at this point. And we have people at the mic. Go on.
I've got a hum off Jabba, and I've got a comment from Henning saying, we've been using DLEP 07 compatible implementation on our research network for a few months, so he thinks it's ready for working group last call. And as Rick Taylor here, I know of about 3 different implementations of 07. They're all ready for 08, and they're ready for prime time, so I think people are really ready to use this.
John Dowdle. Yeah, I'd just like to say big thanks to the author team for getting us through. I know we've had many discussions about some of the more open-ended bits of DLEP.
Well, I've said before, it was supposed to be a project, not a career path.
Yeah, and I'm particularly pleased to see that, take link characteristics as an example, it's been properly nailed down now rather than being open-ended, and I think it will pass muster with those upstairs that need to approve it. So I'm very pleased, and thank you.
Okay.
Good morning. I'm Charlie Perkins, and I'm here to tell you about recent progress and status of AODV v2. There was a revision 7 that was sent out before the draft deadline, and that intention of that was to have resolved the open issues that were on the issue tracker, and so that's what I'll talk about mostly. But then after earlier this week and last week, there were some other comments made, and so this morning or last night there was another revision of the draft released that supplied resolutions for the mainly editorial comments that were made over the last week since 07 came out. So among the recent changes were adding Vicky Murciaka as a co-author. She's been a very valuable set of new eyes and has contributed quite a bit of reorganized text to the document. In general, many of the comments about AODV v2 had been that it needed to have better readability and some ambiguities resolved. And so having read the document a lot of times, it was a little easier for me to somehow not see some of these things. And Vicki in particular, but Vicki and Lotta Steenbrink have been very helpful to see with fresh eyes and propose text that was more clear to them. And so a lot of that has been, you'll see in the document. It also has had the effect, for instance, with reorganizing the protocol message descriptions into major subsections. Well, this didn't really change much about the actual processing of the protocol messages, but it changed a lot about the text. So if you do a diff between, for instance, 6 and 7, you'll have difficulty identifying exactly what's changed because it's all been moved around and reformulated. So in general, we have a major section for each protocol message, route request, route reply, route error, and route reply ACK. And those are subdivided into how to generate, what happens when you receive one, and then how you regenerate. For instance, with route request, it will disseminate through the network until a route can be established. Before we had, since very early days in the document, route request and route reply were combined together to be essentially treated as a kind of message called a route message, because they contain information about updating the route table, for instance, to establish a new route or to show better metric or more fresh sequence number. And so Vicki and Lotta believed, and it seems true, that having those separated out again into separate sections makes readability much better. So that's been done. There's a route request table in the document that has been to suppress duplicates when route requests are sent out. You don't want to constantly be regenerating the route request. You want to only regenerate route requests for destination that you haven't requested before. So in order to do that, there's a table that keeps track of essentially multicast route request messages. And a long time ago it was suggested that should be enlarged to handle the possibility of optional multicast route reply. And the multicast route reply has been an option since also very early days. It can be used to find routes that otherwise might be lost, but it's a lot more processing. So anyway, in order to handle that more cleanly, the route request table was just said, okay, well, we can store other multicast messages like route reply in there. So that was fairly straightforward. It just means that the name of the table had to be changed and a few other minor things. So the various bits of how to operate the protocol were in a couple of different places. And for instance, as the last bullet shows, you can place limits on how many AODV control messages can be generated in a particular time. And so all this sort of little details were collected together into AODV protocol operations section and a couple of other things like that. Next slide, please. So there was a long-standing comment that the way of showing the processing for the protocol messages should be, you might say, better organized. And so that was done according now to the processing steps were located in the previously mentioned new sections and subsections. And it's, as you will see, if you look at the document, much more step-by-step processing description as opposed to, you might say, more verbose or textual sort of description. Justin pointed out last IETF that there didn't seem to be any particularly good reason to keep a distinction between router states broken and expired. A route is broken if a link, for instance, breaks and the link is the next link for a particular route towards a destination. Well, in AODV, that causes a route error message, and a route can expire when it's been too long since any routing update information has been applied to that. So it turns out that the processing for those two states was identical, and so we just combined them and called the combined state to be the invalid state. So a route can become invalid if it either breaks or expires. We had a discussion about how to manage blacklists, and we had in a separate section discussion about monitoring adjacencies. Well, these are closely related operations, and so those two sections were merged, and some of the text in the combined section was redundant, so we had to reformulate some of that. And so that is, I think that's much clearer now. Some of the discussion about how to make very clear all the operations on blacklists, we're still finalizing that, but I think it's mostly all there. One change you might consider it to be an optimization is that previous versions of the AODV draft, so when the route discovery happens, route request goes out, and during the time of the dissemination for the route request, there are routes created to go back to the originating node. Now when route reply is issued by, for instance, the destination device, but it has the requested address, then the route reply has a route to go back to the originating node, because these routes towards the originating node have been saved in the route table. This is the way AODV has always worked. But those routes that were created for the originating node were originally specified to be marked as active routes, even though they had never been used. So Vicki suggested that they should be marked as idle routes, and this has rarely any operational consequences, except if an active route breaks, a route error is issued, and if an idle route breaks, then a route error does not have to be issued. So what this means is that by properly marking the return routes to the originating address as idle instead of active, it's less likely you'll send out any unnecessary route error messages. Okay, the last point here is it turns out that after pretty close analysis, we needed to actually keep track of the last update to the sequence number separately from the last activity along the route. And there's very little implication of this, but what it does mean that even if the route has not been updated with the sequence number, if it's still carrying traffic, there's no reason to expunge the route, because you have it, it's working, and so it's still marked to be an active route, even if you don't have very recent information about the sequence number. And so operationally, what that means is that such routes are maintained and can be useful for carrying traffic, even if you don't use them for other route discovery operations. Next slide, please. One change, there's been some confusion and perhaps even lingering confusion, but I think we're almost done with how to manage bidirectionality for the signaling for route discovery, route request, route reply. So for a long time, it was left more or less Well, you need to make sure that if you send a route reply, that it actually is making progress to get back towards the originating node that requested the route discovery. And so then, for this last one, we finally determined, first of all, that the penalty for requiring a route reply acknowledgement message was very small. And second of all, it made some things unambiguous and even more correct. Because there are, you might say, extraordinarily unlikely cases where the Route Reply Act can do a proper acknowledgement where other methods might not work. So that was made mandatory to implement, and there's still a little bit of discussion, and we've had some even this morning already, about how other methods of determining bidirectional connectivity and adjacency can be used, which would then mean that you don't have to use the acknowledgement required, ACREC and route reply acknowledgement. But anyway, these are mandatory to implement. A long time ago, it was asked, the question was, what happens, you have constants that are defined in AODV version 2. What happens if different implementations use different values for those constants? And so then we had a lot of discussion on the list. Well, a lot of protocols define constants and so on. And so in revision 7, there is text now that shows or describes what happens if different AODV devices use, unfortunately, let's say different values for the constants. Well, it turns out that there isn't any significant damage, but what it does mean is that, for instance, if you have a very small radius of distribution for route request messages, you might not find some. So all the nodes in the network ought to have a maximum value for that to allow them to traverse the network. And similarly for the other protocol constants, you will see now, if you look in the section where they're defined, you will see some descriptions about the consequences of having inconsistent values, which are generally not fatal. My mouth is dried out. Okay, so we had a bit of background here. AODV version 1 basically specified hello messages to have to define the neighborhoods and connectivity, and all the protocol processing was really specified to be brute force. Thank you very much, John. Well, we're a great team, I'll tell you. So then simplified multicast forwarding and some other, and OLSR uses multi-point relay, and the intention all along for AODV was to enable AODV to use whichever sort of connected dominating tree or whatever would be valuable for disseminating the route request messages through the network. So there was language in there that says, okay, if you want to do that, please refer to SMF and so on. Well, that caused a problem because SMF was experimental and AODV is going towards proposed standard, and so there was a mismatch there. So we finally, after immense amount of discussion, have language in the draft that basically says you can use whichever method you want for controlling the distribution of flooded messages in the network. For instance, you can take a look at SMF without mandating an implementation of that. But it is known that brute force flooding adds a lot of signaling to the network, and And if you can reduce that by having some sort of connected dominating set, it's a big improvement. Yes.
Just a question. I'm wondering if we can sort of just very quickly summarize what's left and then move on. I got a feeling there's going to be a fair amount of discussion at the end of this, and then we still want to hang on to the open mic time. So. Okay.
Well, please feel free to ask any questions about these. This already is intended to be a brief summary of longer discussion. What this shows is, so as mentioned before, we had a list of several dozen open issues. Some had been proposed resolution and closed over time. So this is a list of here. It would be nice for people to take a look at the resolutions that have been included in the last versions of the document. These are all expected to be able to be closed. Let me see if I can, anything particular on here. No, this is all very straightforward. Next slide, please. Issue number 34, I think this deserves a small bit of discussion. This section 13 is the one from a long time ago that had optional features listed, and it was just suggested that, well, we should take out all the optional features. Well, one of them is, for instance, precursors. And another one was, at that time, reply ACK was an optional feature. So the reply ACK has been made mandatory to implement, so it's no longer optional. The precursor list has been discussed, can be implemented independently at every node, so there's no interactions between choices made at different nodes. And if you don't implement it, you have perhaps more signaling. If you do implement it, you have less signaling. So that's an example of a good kind of option that doesn't damage the deployability of the protocol. I think maybe it's a good idea to mention issues 37 and 38. This is perhaps the last general area of the draft that still needs work. And even so, big improvements have been made according to some very constructive comments received recently by Chris Dearlove. So what we had thought earlier, say a month or two ago, was that we would adapt a solution from DLAP to manage our security. And according to the comments that have been received over the last couple of weeks, that we will instead of doing that, we will be more specific. And it turns out, and you can look at the mailing list, that what AODV needs doesn't even require identity authentication. We really just need to use the integrity check vector that's already been helpfully specified in RC, I believe 7182, 7183. And according to my current best understanding, we will pick out a particular mandatory to implement algorithm for that, pretty much like has been done already if you look at the RFCs for OLSR. So I think that's mainly it. Next slide, please. What else on here? Another, let's see, issue 47 should be understood that we will take a look at RC 7183 and specify packet. We don't need the timestamp TLV. We really just need to use the ICV. I think that's it. Okay, after 07 came out, it was proposed that instead of using a message TLV for the metric type, that it just be actually used, indicated as an extension byte for the metric address block TLV. And this is actually something that was proposed a year ago, and in the looking at all the other issues, this sort of fell through the cracks, but it was raised again, and so now revision number 8 has this. It was requested to have a specification for binary exponential backoff. That has been put into spec by citing another document that has it in there. We clarified that the illustrations do show not only the contents, but roughly speaking, the structure of that, but they're not packet formats, so the word format was taken out for that. We want to have the document, our intention, as I hope is clear, is to go to last call, and we also want to have it go to Security Directorate and review that. And before it goes to the security review, I think that probably should be more specific, as I mentioned, about what we would use from RSC 7183. And I see that I've been moved to the last slide, so here's my last slide. And the issues that were put out on the list, I think that it would be very helpful to make sure that we've properly resolved them. And well, there's still some interesting, useful work for future work for AODV, but at this point I think I'll just stop, and if there's any questions, be happy to answer.
My name is Adrian Farrell. I owed you a response on list about the security discussion, and as is typical, it's taken me several weeks to actually find the email exchange that we had before about security and read this section in this new draft. I like the text in this new draft on security because it's uncovering issues rather than brushing them under carpets. And that's one of the complaints that Security Directorate normally has with regard to security sections. I suspect you could probably add more paranoia to that section just to expose where the risks are. So that
this is Stan. I've had some email conversation with Chris Dearlove as recently as just this morning, and Chris has got some recommendations because he was the one who initiated the issue. We've taken it, the author team has taken a task, an action item to go back and craft better verbiage that more correctly addresses the concerns. What we'd also like to do is to start trying to initiate some kind of a SecAD early review so that we don't get stepped on like we've been stepped on before.
Yeah, get stepped on early.
Yes.
Yeah, so I think that's wise, and I dropped you the note about how you do that. So it's probably just polish your text first and then kick them. In general, they're responsive to that.
No, if you could, one second, I would like to, well, go ahead.
I've got a question off Jabba from Jazzy, saying, are there any implementations of AODV v2? Is there any intention for an interop event to prove interoperability?
I have not been focusing on that. I've been actually working pretty hard on getting the issue text and issue resolutions, so I don't know the answer to that.
Okay, to help facilitate this conversation, I'd like to give a little bit of history of where we were at the last IETF and where we are now. The last IETF, there was discussion on what we do with this AODV, what we do with AODV v2. Do we make it experimental? Do we push it out of the working group? Do we kill it? Do we give it more time? And we kind of floundered on that for a while, and I guess we came to the conclusion that the timeline that was put forward was going to be followed, and that was get the document ready for last call by this IETF. I believe that was kind of where. So that's where we're at now. I would like to ask the room who's seen the latest, or has seen or read, overlooked the latest draft. 3 hands, 4 hands. I've done so as well.
Rick Taylor, the latest draft, I believe, came out
No,
last
not,
night.
not last night. The one
Right.
before last night.
07, not wait.
Okay, 4 hands then. So we have a little bit, but not a whole lot of eyes on the document. I'm going to switch to the other mic to kind of show my difference in roles here, because I'd like to say the next part as a member, not chair.
And in the meantime, I just want to point out, I know of implementation from Hamburg University. I have no information how complete this implementation is, but I know it's actively being developed, and yeah, so just wanted to point this out.
And I'll also, while Justin's at the mic, I'll ask the next rather obvious question, and that's of the people who have reviewed the draft, of the people earlier who said, yeah, I've looked at it, what percentage of you believe the document is ready for last call? And just real quick show of hands. And I will note that there are no hands up in the room.
So
One late. One came late too. Okay. And they are both on the author team.
I've reviewed 07, not a complete review, and I do not. This is Justin Dean speaking as a working group member. I do not believe it's ready for last call. There are too many large issues with the document, security being one, interoperability with the larger internet as a whole being another, and then the section on bidirectionality link being mandatory, but having some hand-wavy, you can do this or you can do that. Yes, it's defined in there, but it wasn't completely clear to me how everything worked, and I pointed out a few issues, and then in the algorithmic, here are the steps you take, the solution was to remove the first step, which seems very experimental, not ready for prime time standards. That's my opinion. Now, that being said, the latest draft read a lot better, was a lot better, and it was much improved over previous documents. So I'm kind of torn what we do with this, because I do see momentum happening right now, but I don't know. We've been here before. We were here at the last IETF. We were here at the last IETF. We've been here a while, and I don't want to keep being here. So that's where I'm at.
Yeah, I would say from the perspective of having my co-chair hat on, there were essentially, coming out of Honolulu, there were 3 options expressed, and it was kill the document, or get it to the point where it was at last call by this IETF, or possibly change it to experimental status. And of those 3 options, I am firmly behind at least not killing this document. I think there's a tremendous amount of entropy behind it. I think there's a tremendous amount of interest behind it. I think there has been, it's hard for me to state the amount of improvement and the amount of quality. There have been people who've been working extremely hard on this, and I don't think just dropping it's the right way to go.
I want to respond briefly to a couple of things you said, Justin. So the step 1 that Justin referred to basically indicated that these messages were to be received only from neighbors. And then the ambiguity that introduces, you have to, first of all, know that it's a neighbor. Now that language has been in the draft for a long time, and so a little bit susceptible to overlooking it and upon further review. But the reason why it was stated that way was basically because we had in the previous versions of the draft, I believe it's RSC 5082, that allows you to set TTL equal 255 and then to receive not processed messages that didn't come in.
My point really isn't on the specific problem. My point is that there are large problems still in the document that were quite easy to find, and I believe there were going to be more. And it's not one specific issue. I think there are multiple issues, and it's the overall state of the document and not one specific issue that may or if it was just one issue that I was finding, then that would be one thing, but I don't think it's just one issue. That's my overarching point. It's not about one specific issue, it's about the whole thing.
Okay, well, point noted. But to your to the suggestion that we can't be coming here constantly saying, okay, well, one more time. That is not what is expected here. We do want to hear the last call. I am not aware of the, except for the, let's say, security considerations and the need for being more clear about using integrity check vector, for instance, and exhibiting more of a threat model. Anyway, I know Rick wants to talk, so go ahead.
I better make this quick. I can see people are asking questions on Jabber, and I've left my laptop on my desk. Rick Taylor, this is my personal opinion, not a Jabber thing. Thanks, John. I've seen the rate of change in the document has massively increased over the last 3 months, and I can see that their improvements are now coming fast and furious, but I don't think you're there yet. But I personally am really pleased to see these improvements happening, and it sounds like you've got a bigger team who are doing good work on this. I think it would be a great pity to kill it now, just when we're starting to see some real improvement, but I'm afraid I don't think you're ready for last call today. I would love to see this be given another 3 months to the next, and then really make that last call there, because the feedback's coming in. We're not ready there, but the rate of change is much higher than we've seen for the last 3-4 years. So that's a sort of partial thumbs up from me. I've also got a quick Jabber question from Jazzy, if you don't mind. Jazzy's first point was Adrian drew a line in the sand at the last IETF. Now we are at that line. And followed up by, I think there are several major issues to be solved, including security, gateways, different options, interoperability, etc. If I remember correctly, the working group consensus was that Manet working groups should require industrial, usable implementations for standard track documents.
I will disagree with that comment from Jazzy. The discussions from the Manet working group was that we were looking for implementations. I don't think there were any additional qualifiers placed on those. So I respectfully disagree.
Yeah, Manuel Bocelli in Ria. I mean, I think I firmly agree with what Rick Taylor just said. There are two ways to go about this. Either we think that we should stick to the limits we set ourselves, like in terms of processing, IETF process and stuff like that. And then, it's a tough call. Or we think that what's important is actually the gradient of, progress on this document. I mean, from my point of view, there is interest in this document, and this gradient is really clearly going in the right direction. Like we see not only improvement, but improvement in the rate of improvements. So, I mean, I would also really think it's a pity if we kill this document at this stage. Yeah. So, I support that we continue working on this document.
John Dowdle. So where we were at Honolulu, so since then we've specifically added 2 authors, specifically to accelerate the development of the draft. Lottie based on her implementation experience, Vicky based on her really good skill in analysing, you hand her something, say please make sense of that, does it hang together, and she's pretty good at doing that. There has been an enormous amount of work over the last 4 months. There's been conference calls every week. There's been huge discussion on the mailing list. This is a big document. I would urge those people who want to review it to sit down, if you can give the time. I know it's difficult these days. Just spend some time going through it. It's a big document. Just give it a fair review. Yes, we can see that there are still some issues with it, but I would just urge the co-chairs, please give it some chance, because we have come a very long way, and I would really hope to see this effort fall at this particular fence.
Rick Taylor again. Slightly sort of following on from my previous statement, if the co-chairs and the working group is happy to let this run for one more session, let's not remove the pressure on AODV. I think the pressure on the AODV team to get this done is yielding results. If they're given a reprise, sorry, my English has failed me, don't let them think that we're not really staring at them going, come on, let's get it done. So just keep the pressure on, but I think you should be given one last chance.
I think if you put any more pressure on me, you'll see blood.
I think the issue is not entirely 100% up to the working group. We do have 2 ADs, one outgoing, one incoming, sitting over here. I'd like to hear their comments, either or both. I will say I'm also in the camp that there's been a ton of work done. There's been a ton of entropy that's been added to this project. It was expressed to me by someone who shall remain nameless that whereas before they couldn't see an end to it, now they can see the end. I'm also, with the security implications and with some other with some other textual changes that were recommended this morning by Vicki, I'm of the opinion that we're not there yet in terms of last call myself, but I'm of the opinion that we're getting much closer and it's getting much better, and things are, you know, I don't think we should kill the document, is the position I'm at. Mr. A.B.?
It's Adrian. So I have a question to the room, I guess. Anybody here worked on a project to develop software? Could you put your hand up? Anybody here out of that set ever work on a project to develop software that delivered late? So I'm
Anybody here worked on a software was supposed to be a project that turned into a career path?
So I'm very heartened by the progress with this document. I think that the latest revisions have got it to a stage where people are able to review it in entirety without becoming deep experts in the protocol. I think that's the difference. You know, the readability question before meant that you had to totally absorb the protocol before you could make the review comments. And now I believe it's possible to read it and review it. The downside of that is, of course, that people are going to read it and review it.
That'd be great.
Right. And so the comments that you've been seeing coming, I think, in the last couple of months, you've had more comments of a constructive review nature on the protocol than you've had in the life of the protocol. And so, you know, the better it gets, the more work there is to be done. So I don't believe this version is working group last call ready, but I can see, just as you said, I can now see the end of the tunnel. So in Honolulu we were saying you must have an end of a tunnel, but we couldn't see it. Well, I couldn't see it, you probably could. I'm now at the point where I can see that end of the tunnel. It's not as close as I would have liked, but I can see it. from a project management point of view, and this is probably to the chairs, in order to hold the author team's feet to the fire and to give the working group confidence that this isn't going to come back in Prague with, well, we're not quite ready for working group last call, can we push it off another one? I'd love to see some sort of almost monthly milestones.
I really think that we can go to last call before the next IETF.
So I'm really pleased to hear that and prove it.
I will be delighted to do so.
So the proving it is not just do the work and get it there for last call, but like prove it tomorrow by saying, I'm going to do this revision by this date, and it will mop up the comments I've had so far, and then I know that there will be more comments in that period, so I'll do another revision by this date to mop up those comments, and then I believe we'll be ready for last call on that date. And you know, so that's classic project management.
Okay, thank you for that. And to that point, I would again like to point out that in a way we did do that. We actually took all the open issues that were extant as of the time when 07 could be published, and you can see the results here. Now, in the meantime, as you point out, the additional the better readability of the document has caused more comments to come out, and I think that we already have exhibited that we would be responsive to those comments in short order.
Right, and you know, I don't doubt your intention to work on them and address all comments you receive. It's seeing those intermediate milestones towards the last call that allows everybody to see, okay, there is a plan, I see what the plan is, I can see us progressing against it.
Okay, thank you.
Just a quick one from Rick Taylor again, and this applies to AODV as well as DLEP. There is an implicit contract between putting these fast milestones in and saying we'll do this by X, by Y, by Z, and it worked for DLEP. Adrian had pretty much the same conversation with the DLEP author team in Honolulu, and we did it, and it worked for us. But it also means the working group has to understand that these documents are working to deadlines, and we've got to review them. And this is addressed to you guys out on the internet. Get reading these things, because otherwise the author team put the work in, meet the milestone, get a draft out there, and to deathly silence, and then the wheels come off.
Well, yeah, and that was why with DLEP, and I think with AODV2, the assumption from the author team going forward is that silence is equal to acceptance. If you're not talking about it, we have to make an assumption, and the assumption we're going to make as an author team is you like it.
So well, go ahead. Go ahead.
You've still got another about 9 hours before you can do that.
Fair.
So I see two things in that. Firstly, if you make your schedule, your work schedule, public, people can see what's going on and know when it's opportune to review. So yeah, that's one of the points of the working group last call. It's, hey, now is the time to review. So if they can see, okay, there's a new version coming out and the plan is to do another version in 4 weeks' time, I'd better review it in the next 2 weeks. That helps get that feedback. The other one is, and we have this with our existing review cycle, it would be nice if people reviewed stuff before working group last call, but sometimes they don't do it until then. It would be nice if they did it in working group last call, but sometimes they don't do it till IETF last call. And that is hard, but you want the best possible document with the best possible protocol. So you've got to encourage people to review early, but take the pain when they review late.
So we, as chairs, we're coming into this with 3 options. It seems like the working group, just talking it out, we've come to the one. The 3 options were kill it, make it experimental, or go one more IETF. And it seems like the consensus in the room, just from the conversations, is that there is stomach to go one more time. That brings up another question, is what are the consequences? And I don't think killing it is going to be stomachable at this point, at the next, because we're just going to be in this spot again. So I think if it's not ready for last call at the next one, I would propose we make it experimental at that time, because I do think we'll have stomach to make it experimental if they don't meet that deadline. I'd like to ask the room of those two options: keep it going for one more, kill it; keep it going for one more, make it experimental. And I guess there's a third, just see what happens.
I will say both as a or as a co-chair of the group, as a member of the author team, and as a working group participant, I completely concur with the notion of going one more IETF, and if it's still not last callable, then let's make it experimental.
Alvaro Ratana, Cisco. I'm going to be the AD tonight, so I'm just going to suggest this as worker participant.
Everybody all together now. Aww. We're sorry.
Yeah, thank you. But if you ask me tomorrow, I'll probably have the same opinion. Yes, it seems that everyone is okay with going one more. You have a good suggestion about setting a specific work plan and, of course, sticking to it. I would like to see maybe a little bit more forceful action from the working group. Instead of hoping that you publish the revision and someone reviews it, you set more specific milestones. And what I'm suggesting is that between now and Prague, we have 4 months. If we can get together as a working group at least a couple of times between now and then we know what the progress is really being made. Then we know that we force, for whatever the day is, that we have a meeting, we discuss live the actual issues that may be coming up, and we keep going. And so what that would mean is that hopefully before we get to Prague, we know what it is. And so we know that, this is where we're going to go this way or the other way. And not just let the live discussion happen, once every 4 months. It's too bad that we only get together physically once every 4 months, but we can get together virtually whenever you want, right? Just a matter of scheduling it and making sure that the people that are reviewing are present virtually. Right?
So for example, we could schedule an interim teleconference and have people join the teleconference and make sure that the issue resolutions that we propose are satisfactory. And I would be happy to organize such a thing. We in fact already have teleconferences which have worked out well. I've learned Google Hangouts, so it's good.
So again, just a clarification. What I'm suggesting is that the working group organize that.
Okay,
we can use your Hangout if you want to, or whatever you guys want to do. But, to be a working group meeting, right? Yeah. So that there's issues or whatever, and we can even talk about consensus in the interim meeting, right? And make the decision before we get to Prague. You guys mentioned that you want to talk about, how to take the working group forward, right? And if we can close this before Prague, then we can, in Prague, start working on new stuff, right? If there's some new stuff to go work on.
That's fair. The co-chairs will take an action item to start looking at trying to schedule an interim meeting or a couple of interim meetings between now and Prague.
Thank you.
So as a quick review,
Rick,
yeah,
Taylor, here. Did we actually get an answer to your question, Justin?
No. I wanted to ask the working group. I think we have a plan. Let's do a yes/no on the plan. Well,
let's go for this. Give us a hum. If you agree that the correct approach with AODVV2 is to let it run for one more IETF up to Prague with some interim meetings and to leave it as standards track and keep it going, then please hum. Okay? If you are completely opposed to that plan and think some other option should be pursued, please hum. I hereby declare consensus. We will let it run for one more IETF, and then if it is not prepared, if it's not ready, it goes experimental.
Just on Jabba, Jersey would like this to be confirmed on the list.
So now we have time for open mic, and I'd like to rehash the idea of that I had mentioned at the beginning of the meeting, that we are looking to recharter. Our work is wrapping up. We can start the discussion now, but I think we should also post things to the list, and now is a good time to post proposals of what interests you and work to be done within the Manet realm. I have a few ideas. Stan has a few ideas. Some of them overlap, some of them don't. I think we need to have a large discussion as a working group on what we're going to do as a group as a whole. So if anyone has any ideas now, you can speak them now or post them to the list.
Rick Taylor again. I have lots of stuff I want to do with DLEP, so I'd quite like to see some more DLEP work being brought up moving forwards in a rechartering, but I can put some more details on the mailing list. But I have some ideas, and I want to see what the rest of the group think, and that sort of stuff. So.
I'm Charles Perkins, and I have a couple of things I think deserve attention. One is the business of reduced forwarding backbone or connected dominating set. In particular, as mentioned earlier, AODV should be, let's say, proposed standard specification enabled to use such a thing, and yet the connected dominating set, as I understand it, is still experimental. And this makes a huge difference in performance in big enough networks. You can reduce signaling by a factor of 70%, and so that matters. So I think that should be considered. And then workarounds for situations where routes exist, but not every path component is bidirectional, should also be considered, because sometimes the restriction to every path component being bidirectional means that you just cannot communicate. So these are two things, and I guess lastly, there's already been a general feeling in the group that hybrid protocols have some promise. So I think that should be considered. There's already, I believe, a recent proposal for that. And see, there's something else equally important, but I'll remember it in a minute. Thank you.
I've got some comments off Jabba. Going back one discussion, Jazzy wanted to point out that consensus is not called in the room, but on the mailing list. And on the current discussion, Henning would like to say that his group have at least 2 extensions for DLEP in mind, and they also have some extensions for OSR v2 as well.
Some of the things that, Brian Adamson from NRL, I agree with the things that have been said so far. One note on Charlie's comment with respect to the CDS backbone. The SMF draft is an experimental draft, and we actually purposefully called out the specific relay set formation algorithm as an appendices in that document, because there may be other relay algorithms that can be developed over time, and so those appendices kind of act as a model or template for if you needed to specify, if you wanted to specify a different CDS algorithm in the future, you could do that, and that algorithm could be applied against SMF, which SMF is really for flooding, forwarding of user plane data end-to-end across the SMF domain. I think in the case of using the backbone for routing control messages, you likely are going to be doing some hot-by-hot processing of those messages, which is not really SMF as a forwarding function does. However, the algorithms that SMF specifies are perfectly applicable, as you point out, towards what we do on backbone control plane for routing protocols. As a matter of fact, they were stolen from the Manet backbone algorithms for that reason. So I think there's stuff to do there, and one of the concepts that we're tossing around in NRO is some possible enhanced CDS formation algorithms. We actually had a paper a year ago or so on an augmentation that results in more stable relay set selection in face of dynamic changes in topology. And Justin and I are also looking at some optimizations related to multiple interfaces, how you would possibly do CDS across a heterogeneous Manet. So that's definitely one area that the charter is. There's some things that we can do there. Totally agree with DLEP extensions. That's why we made DLEP, was to make a career, right, Stan?
Apparently.
Apparently. Finally, I think multicast routing for Manet, where we actually look at group specific and not just flooding everything in the Manet domain. I think there's some ideas on the table that we've seen in previous meetings, and those are, I think, candidate things to pursue in the group. And that's all I can remember at the moment. I may think of another one and come back to the mic before we're done. But.
And I would say, Brian, some of those ideas sound really, really cool, and I hope you get them down on an email and out on the list.
Yes, I was going to ask,
please.
Are we going to capture these bullets as sort of potential future charter items?
I think especially you guys at the mic, if you'll get them out on the list, and we'll talk about them, and yeah.
All right, I'll take that as an action. Thanks.
It's Rick Taylor again. I was going to say a +1 for the multicast stuff. I wish I had time to get on with it now, but it's on my hit list, and I think the stuff that SMF is kicking off, there's some good multicast ideas out there. Let's crack on with them.
Yeah, I think clearly there's a close relationship between multicast group-based forwarding and SMF, so yeah. Now, I remember the other thing I wanted to mention, which was gateway support. It's not trivial. It can be done better or worse, and maybe it also matters about whether there's more than one gateway. And finally, although I don't personally want to go there, but there was some discussion about multi-homing as well. So, so that was what I was trying to remember a while ago.
This is Bob Cole, U.S. Army. So I want to third or fourth the multicast discussion. So most of our traffic is multicast, the lower tactical edge. I want to emphasize what Charlie said about gateway work. We're not deploying single, Manets. They're interconnected. They're multi-homed. We're trying to figure out how to scale all this. And so any kind of work around gateway work and multi-home gateway work, I think, would be very useful. Thanks.
Yeah, +1 on the multiple gateway and et cetera. The other thing related to multicast is group membership management too. Regardless of the specific Manet multicast distribution mechanism that we come up with, there's also some work to be done, both on how do you actually do group management efficiently in a mobile domain where IGMP isn't necessarily the right answer because it was designed to work with a single neighboring router. Where in Manet that's not the case, almost never. And there are multiple gateway issues interfacing Manet multicast domain with PIM domain with possible multiple egress ingress points too. So that's all tied together.
Ron Infeld. Unlike Rick Taylor, I don't have a whole lot of ideas for DLEP. I only have one, but I want to pursue that. I strongly support more work on multicast. I also think that it could be more work done on link metrics. I'm not fully convinced that directional airtime is the be-all and end-all of link metrics, so I would like to look in that a bit more.
Rick Taylor again, this kind of building on what Brian and Bob were saying about heterogeneous networks and how do your border routers and so on. It occurred to me that we've had that draft come round again about hybrid routing protocols, and the general consensus I seem to have picked up from the mailing list, and I haven't been following it that closely, was that appeared to be just slamming these things together and hoping for the best didn't seem to be the right approach. Kind of, I think we're sort of skirting around ideas as such of Manets of Manets. So you've got little Manets using their own routing protocols, and then how do you board a gateway out of one into what could either be the fixed infrastructure or the next Manet across that you didn't expect to arrive. I mean, it's all fairly sci-fi, but someone might come up with something clever there and chuck out something informational or experimental.
I agree with what you're saying. I will just point out that as we start looking at charter items, one of the things that we have to do is to look for work that is identifiable and finite and can be done in specific periods of time. So, or in the case of DLEP, you think it can be done in a certain period of time and it winds up being a career path. That said, I mean, what we're talking about here, this discussion has to start there, but just please remember as we start to work through it on the list, we need to actually get identifiable milestones so that we're not just simply off in a corner researching, because that's not what the IETF does.
This is Adrian, just being a contributor. I would really love that the working group went looking at some of the deployments of its existing protocols to see what the users of the protocols are missing. I think as a community here, we're very much into building stuff for what we perceive as the next step. It would be nice if we cross-fertilized with the IRTF group, Gaia, who are looking at bringing the internet out into populations that don't currently have access. And one of their hot uses is OLSR. It would be nice if we looked at some of the community networks and the problems that they are having linking their networks together, and seeing how we can provide tools for these things.
Manuel Bocelli, INRIA. Thank you, Adrian, for stealing all my words. But like more, maybe one sub-point that kind of goes in this direction. It might be interesting to revisit like what kind of link layers we're actually working on now. When we started Manet, like, okay, maybe I shouldn't say how many years ago, what did we have? We had a really different situation. We have a whole bunch of new stuff that has come out in terms of link layers. I don't think anybody, well, maybe somebody here in this room has like a global view, but I'm not sure. And that might be interesting to kind of like as a sub point of what Adrian just said. Basically looking at deployments and what people want to do and what are we going to work on. I think that would be really interesting for various parts of this community.
I have some comments from Jabba, both from Henning actually. Yes, multicast for mesh is important, so he's a plus one on the multicast point, and I think it was a response to Ronald saying directional airtime is a good start, but definitely not the end as a metric. So.
I'd like to point out one more possible problem that we still have not fully solved, and that's auto configuration. I'm tossing it out there not because I want to work on it, but because I think it hasn't been mentioned yet. So and it's still a problem.
So this is Bob Cole, U.S. Army. I'm coming up because Brian made me come up to raise that issue. So But there is a lot of work, I think, going on in different working groups around making management protocols more Manet friendly. And I don't know if the work ought to be done in here, or we track it, or we give requirements to those guys. You know, I'm not sure how to best address it. From Army perspective, it is our #1 problem, is configuring the network, by far. It's not even close. Close second is, you know, scaling. It's not a close second. I mean, I don't know how to emphasize it enough. We struggled for years trying to configure stuff. So, thanks.
Well, a couple of things. First of all, an ad hoc network in its sort of original conception was something that would work even if it wasn't configured properly, and basically ad hoc. So I don't think we should completely lose sight of that, although I don't want to diminish the importance of well configured and managed networks. Regarding the auto configuration, you know, we had actually some pretty cool auto configuration algorithms 10 years ago, and they were built, worked, had good scaling properties, and so on. And then in the AutoConf group, they couldn't decide what a link was. So we have a document that describes about how wireless interfaces communicate. We could possibly adopt that within this group. It's already written. It's already served up on a golden platter. And I think it obviously has value for any such discussion about auto configuration or whatever address assignment that might need to pay attention to the properties of the communication channels between the devices. And I forgot my third thing, so I'll sit down.
Stan Ratliff, iDirect. I wanted to come out here because, frankly, it makes it easier to throw things at you at this point. You've used the dreaded A word, and I want to point out to the group that the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. Charlie's right. There was a wonderful group that got into AutoConf and got into a multi-year discussion over what is a link. Frankly, I don't want to do that again.
We have DLAP now.
DLAP just tells you what the data rate is on whatever the link is. Okay, so you know, I seem to remember a certain individual who is sitting in this room who spent 45 minutes not being able to get off of the title slide of his presentation because the food fight broke out in Philadelphia.
Since then, I'm not the same individual.
Oh. It wasn't your fault. So my vote on, in terms of AutoConf, quite frankly, my vote is not only no, but heck no.
It's Adrian. I need to point out to Stan that another definition of insanity is repeating the definition of insanity over and over again, expecting people to listen. There are two related AutoConf efforts going on in the IETF at the moment, and it's probably more constructive to throw your food at them than to invite them to come here and throw food at you. Those efforts are going on in HomeNet, which is a teeny little sub-corner of a space that you might be associated with, and in a new group called Anima, who have a rather broad AutoConf terms of reference, and they may be focusing much more on the wired network. ANIMA, yes. They are only very recently formed, and I think are probably just learning how to thrash.
It's Bob Cole. I'm not suggesting auto configuration. I think there's work we need to do in plain old configuration. I think there are protocols being developed, the IETF, for standardizing configuration on big iron platforms. Those protocols won't work over Manet's. We know they won't work over Manet's. So I think there are things we can do that are more standard management, but improve standard management capabilities to allow us to use them.
I'm Charlie Perkins. The other thing I wanted to mention a while ago has to do with there's actually a lot of interest in other kinds of routing protocols that resemble somewhat Manet, but they're really, you might say, tree-based, or alternatively you could say beacon-based, where some device sets itself up as a tree node or route for a routing tree, and then routing doesn't proceed arbitrarily. It proceeds up and down, upstream and downstream from the tree node. Now in IEEE 802.15 uses a similar aspect of that. And even a long time ago in Manet there was a very nice proposal, I believe it was called Pulsar. Descriptively, a device would beacon its presence and offer itself essentially as a focal point for routing. I believe that this kind of routing deserves attention. You can organize a group of communicating devices into a network, even an ad hoc network. And so if this is resembles what's been done in ROLL and 6LoWPAN, so I think it's likely that we could somehow reduce the plethora of that and maybe have some useful interactions if we would look at such tree-based routing mechanisms.
Okay, one more time, I'd just like to point out that all of you who are at the mic, and I think this is a great discussion we're having, but all of you at the mic, please take, or who have been at the mic during this discussion, please take an action item to take the thoughts that you talked about at the mic, get them into an email and get them on the mailing list so that we can all actively discuss them. Don't want to lose any good ideas here.
Rick Taylor again. I have a partially written draft that's looking for a home, and maybe Manet Next Gen might be the right place for it, which is how do you inform the Layer 7 applications that your Manet is doing something strange underneath it?
+1.
Yeah, it's such an obvious thing when you start to deploy these things.
One of the things I've been interested in from the get-go, now that we have DLEP, even though it's been a career path, DLEP gets routing metrics, or gets metrics about the link quality to layer 3. What happens if you extend that understanding of what the link quality is like all the way up to layer 7? And the applications can react. I think that's fascinating.
Yeah, I've got something Alto-ish, but Alto is the wrong home for it because that's big iron again. But maybe Manet is the right place for it. So that's just one other item for the list. But
yeah, so since people have been mentioning configuration auto or not, just wanted to add one more sentence, especially in the context of other working groups. So Adrian mentioned that there's something happening in HomeNet. I happen to know a little bit about it, and they're about to waste a lot of time because the discussion is taking a very well-known turn here, talking about like do we depend on transitivity, characteristics for the communication primitives that we rely upon for the protocols that we are going to develop for configuration in the context of HomeNet, and we've been there, and it's hairy. It's hairy only in one if one condition is not fulfilled, is if no one if we don't have the same baseline of what are the characteristics of the wireless multi-hop communications that we're building upon. There happens, as Charlie was pointing, there happens to be a document that just talks about that. And we think it's one of the useful outcome of the AutoConf working group, even though it's far off from what we had planned in the beginning. But if this kind of document is not, if we don't have such a document as a baseline to develop auto configuration or configuration schemes, whether it be in Manet or in HomeNet or in 6.0 or whatever, I think we're going to hell, and we know it. And so for now, this draft is submitted to Int area. It's already been discussed there. I'm not sure where it belongs. It could belong here, but it could belong also somewhere else. Int area is maybe not a bad idea. But I would really like to see this document just, RFC'd, and then take this as a baseline for whatever discussion we have on configuration in this working group or elsewhere.
Okay, anything else? Going once, going twice.
In your list, I think you missed what Adrian was talking about. So in relationship with Gaia, I don't see it. And I was talking about like maybe a sub-bullet of that would be having some kind of survey of like the new layer 2s we're talking about now, and deployments, things like that, right? Gaia, G-A-I-A. IRTF.
Would you be willing to make an entry for tree-based routing in your list there?
Again, make sure all these get out on the mailing list. Let's not make poor Justin the one and only note taker, okay?
All right, got it. I will do that.
I was putting this list together as everyone was talking, just so I could see it as summary. I'd like to point out that this list is more than I think one working group should work on. There's more in this list than all of us can do. So we need the help of the larger IETF if we're going to solve these problems, and I think that would be a good thing. So part of the discussion that we're going to have about rechartering is what we scope ourselves to and which problems we do. And if we don't select some of those, that doesn't mean they're not good ideas and shouldn't belong somewhere. So maybe a BOF on some of these ideas wouldn't be a bad idea to separate out and get the work done where it needs to be done and organized in a correct way. I would like to reiterate, I'm going out of order here, the gateway and external network support. For a long time, Manet has been like this red-headed stepchild of the IETF. It's like those guys are just doing weird things. And I think if we work on making solutions that work with the larger internet, they'll see it as less weird, and we'll get better participation from outside intelligent people, and we will learn a lot in the process as well. So that's one area I'm really interested in.
Okay, I hereby propose that everybody else or that this whole group gets what, a half hour of their life back, an hour of their life back, and that we conclude this session. It looks like we pretty much talked out some ideas, and we've done our work items. And are we ready to go? Gone. Thank you, everybody. Thanks for coming. We're here all week.
If you haven't signed the blue sheets, please do.
Yes.
Everybody.